One job this afternoon is to introduce you to the next guy. So let's go. Dryden Pence is a Harvard-trained economist. And after graduation, he joined the Army. He specialized in psychological warfare. Don't get scared. We're all cool here. And rose to the rank of colonel. He was very good at his job. He earned numerous awards, and he was awarded the Legion of Merit, which is one of the highest honors that a soldier can earn. He's been in the investing arena as a pro since 1987. He's our chief investment officer. He's an accredited investment fiduciary, a certified portfolio manager. He manages $2 billion in assets, and he is on TV all the time. Whoops, I went too far. Anyways, he's on TV all the time. Dryden Pence, come on up here. It's time to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, thank you very much, Otto. Hey, before I get started, I do want to recognize a couple of folks in the audience who came in. Phil Cavish and Peter Keon. Many of you all know them from the law firm of Cavish. Give them a round of applause, of course. And I also want to make sure that I thank all the sponsors that are in your program. They help us put this thing on, and I do want to make sure that I call out Lynn Pollock and Katie Rao and Louis Silva and Alex and all the people on our team who helped make this a good event. We're doing okay so far, right? So please give them a big round of applause. Now let me get started with our screens here. There we go. All right, this is the audience participation portion of the event. Everybody, please repeat after me. Past performance is no guarantee of future returns. Yay. Okay, that's good. And also, there's a reason, you'll find out here in a few minutes, why you have a lighthouse and why you have umbrellas. Doesn't quite cover my bald head, but anyway, why you have umbrellas and why you have these pinwheel things. And make sure you take them home with you, okay? So make sure you take them home with you on your tables, because they're to remind you of some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But I want to start with a tall tale. Not that I ever tell stories, right? Now, this story is about Reverend Roger. Now, Reverend Roger lives in South Louisiana, where there's the Mississippi River and there's great big levees, right? And like dikes that hold back the river because the ground's below that. And lo and behold, after 50 years, there's a big unexpected event, and the levee breaks. Now, Reverend Rogers is the leader of his community, and a police car comes running over to his house. Reverend Rogers, levee broke. Everything's going to flood. Your house is going to be underwater. Get in the car. We're going to get you out of here. Reverend Rogers goes, no, fellas. My faith in the Lord is strong. He's not going to let me drown. I'll be okay. You guys go and save somebody else. Well, lo and behold, the water keeps coming in, and it comes in. He's now standing on his front porch, and the water's up to his waist. And Louisiana National Guard comes by in a boat, and they go, Reverend Roger, levee broke. Whole area is going to flood. Get in the boat. You're going to drown. Reverend Roger goes, no, fellas, you go on. My faith in the Lord is strong. He's not going to let me drown. I'll be okay. Y'all go on. So they go on. A little bit later, Reverend Roger is standing on top of his house. Water's still coming up. Coast Guard comes by in a helicopter. Reverend Rogers, get in the basket. Hold on to the ladder. Flood's going to come. You're going to drown. No, fellas, you go on and save somebody else. Go on. My faith in the Lord is strong. He's not going to let me drown. Helicopter goes off. Water keeps rising. Reverend Roger drowns. Now, a little bit later, he's there. He's made it to heaven. God says, welcome, my good and faithful servant. Roger says, Lord, I'm glad to be here, but I've got one question. I've been faithful. My faith was strong. God, why did you let me drown? God looks at Reverend Roger and says, Roger, I sent you a police car, I sent you a boat, and I sent you a helicopter. What more do you want? The point of the matter is, sometimes there are large and unexpected things that happen, and they have unprecedented consequences. As a matter of fact, 2022 is what I call the year of right? We had unexpected things happen with unprecedented consequences. At the beginning of 2022, nobody predicted that we would have another major war in Europe. At 2022, nobody predicted that we were going to have a massive spike in inflation because of that. And yet we did. And those things had unprecedented consequences. As you all know far too well, 2022 was the worst year in the stock market in 70 years. In 70 years. But let's go back and talk about what created all of this stuff. No one expected COVID. Yet it happened. We had COVID. Everybody remembers that. We had COVID. COVID occurred. It was unexpected. What was our reaction to COVID? Our reaction was, because nobody really knew what to do or what was going on, we dropped money out of helicopters. We unleashed the most massive stimulus that this nation has ever known. We put more money into the economy in 1 year, $5.4 trillion. We put more money into the economy in 1 year in response to COVID than we spent in all 4 years of World War II. We added 25% of our total GDP, and we dumped it in the economy. And that began to smolder this basis that we had of inflation, because we had too much stimulus. Too much money chasing too few goods causes inflation. So we dropped money out of helicopters, and then all of a sudden the spark came. You had a war in the Ukraine. And the war in Ukraine triggered a massive increase in gas prices. And that was the spark that lit a tremendous amount of inflation. We had COVID, stimulus, war, and then the Federal. Who knows who this guy is? Ask all your friends if they know who this guy is. Most people do not know who Jerome Powell is. But the point is, he's head of the Federal Reserve. And what did he do? Rose interest rates. Now, who remembers interest rates doubling under Paul Volcker, right? You went from 10 to 20. It doubled. He raised it 20 times in 1 year. Not a doubling of interest rates, a 20-fold increase in 1 year. The most rapid increase in interest rates of the greatest magnitude ever since they've been doing this. And what was the response to that? Stock market fell. So you have causality of unexpected events creating unprecedented results. Where does that leave us? Part of it leaves us with a realization of this. COVID was World War III. 200 years from now, an economist like me sitting back just looking at data, they're going to go, oh my gosh, we had 1 year where we lost 6.9 million people and we spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Must have been a world war. So congratulations. You all survived. But you all also know somebody, or know somebody who knows somebody, who did not. COVID was World War III. What does that teach us? There are parallels to this. Some of us were young, or of an age, we were children in World War II. For some of us, this is the first world war anybody's recognized. The enemy was a germ, not a bullet. It was biologic. It doesn't matter who started it or why, but it affected everybody. And we all had to put on a defensive posture. And instead of helmets and body armor, we had to use vaccines. And there are a tremendous number of casualties, 6.9 million. But there is good news. As Rob talked about, the federal government always puts out great truthful information. Did you know that in 12 days the federal government will officially end COVID? Congratulations. Give yourself a round of applause. World War III is now over. The important thing, and this goes back to our pinwheels and our coffee cups and our lighthouses and our umbrellas, and the title of today's thing is After the Storm. We have been through a storm. As a matter of fact, a couple of people kind of came by and tugged on my coat. They wanted to see what the inside lining was of my coat this year because they know we always do that. So you had the pinwheels on your table. That's the wind, right? The umbrellas is for the rain. And folks, here's the thunder and lightning. Here's the thunder and lightning. But the important thing to recognize is let's look at history and where we stand. You know, the firebombing of Dresden was actually more damaging than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But yet, that's Dresden today. When you take a look at what happened in Katrina, that boat is in Reverend Rogers' front yard, right? You can see that it has recovered. After the storm, after the carnage, after whatever happens, human nature has a way of recovering. Even after something like Chernobyl, you begin to see what we do as a society and humanity. And so after the storms, what happens? The sky clears, the sun comes out, grass begins to grow. We begin to move on. And indeed, for those of you who have been following me for a number of years, I talk about human behavior in the aspect of airline passenger loadings, right? Who's going to get on a plane when? And you recognize a couple of years we talked about that, and go back to 2019, pre-COVID, we were the green line. All of a sudden, everybody stops traveling. That's the red line through 2022. And now you can see, here's the fact. The human behavior is back doing what we do, and everybody's flying on airplanes again. The point is the human beings find a way. That creates a trend, a basis of investment demand. We want to be in front of that. That helps inform us as to where we should be investing. Get in front of the wave. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of questions because there's been a lot of stuff in the news that people are talking about these days. And I'm going to talk about some of these things for you. Some of them are related, some are not. One of the things I get asked a lot of questions about, the death of the dollar. Right? You turn on the news and everybody's going like, oh my gosh, the dollar will no longer be the reserve currency and this and that and the other. I'm going to talk about the death of the dollar for you real quick. I'm reminded of a quote from Mark Twain. Rumors of my demise are greatly exaggerated. All right? And here's why. The dollar is the world's reserve currency and is what we're used for trade because we're basically 88% of trade. We are so absolutely dominant in global trade that our currency is what is required. And folks, I could spend an hour and a half on this, but in the final analysis, let me tell you, your currency is only as good as your army. We have a darn good one. That's why it says legal tender for all debts, public and private, on your currency, right? Bitcoin does not say that. El Salvador does not have an army. Because in the end, who enforces international trade? The military. The military. And by the way, take a look at China. Everybody's talking about China's going to whoop us. Well, guess what? If China grows at the rate that it grows, and the U.S. grows at the rate that it's going to grow, in 36 years, the Chinese economy might be as big as ours. Not next year. Not by the end of this year. And as a matter of fact, 50% of the trade that's done inside China is done in dollars. Even they don't trust their own currency. A lot of people are saying a lot of things just to scare you. The point is you got to think about this. Large demand, large trade, large economies. We're the largest one in the world. We trade in dollars. Everybody wants to sell stuff to us. They got to accept dollars. Anybody wants to buy stuff from them, they pay us in dollars. There is another currency. They worked really hard, the euro. Everybody remember that? And for them to get as big as they needed to be to have parity with us, they had to take 26 countries and the GDP of 26 countries and loop it together. And to do that, they had to accept Greece. Do you remember that problem? The point is yes, there will be some moment far in the future when the Chinese yuan and the dollar and the euro may all trade at parity. They all may be similar reserve currencies. But there's not a point where the US dollar quits being a major reserve currency in the world. For that to happen, our economy would have to shrink by about 90%, and the whole rest of the world's economy would have to grow by about 90 or 100%. Neither of those things are going to happen. Those two things can't happen at the same time, right? So I think you're fine. Quit worrying about it. Quit worrying about it. A lot of people doing stuff just to scare you. Let's move on to reality. What's going on in the stock market? The stock market has been very volatile. Has anybody just loved this ride? I mean, if you like this ride, go to Disneyland. They've got roller coasters, right? Last year was absolutely the worst stock market in 70 years because you had a long downward trend for a long period of time. And I do want to thank our investment team because even in that moment, we ended up number 7. Now, the point of the matter is we've now turned a corner post the October lows. If you can look at this chart, we've gone from a moment where we were having lower highs and lower lows to a moment where the market's still volatile, but we're having higher highs and higher lows. So you begin to see this trend growing over time. And indeed, for those of you who are big fans of all the math we do at the beginning of the year, this is the famous range fan, this is where we are. So the expectation for this year is pretty much, we'll probably be high on the S&P 500, high single digits, low double digits, as we work through what's going on the rest of this year. And I'll get into why. And so this is kind of where we think the market's going to be for the rest of the year. But we are going through a period of volatility, and that's because transitions create turbulence. We are transitioning to a world post-COVID. We're getting past that. So transitions create turbulence. Like when you're flying in an airplane, when does it get bumpy? When you're changing altitudes, when you're moving around. So the market's going to continue to be a little turbulent. The economy is going to continue to be a little turbulent, but directionally in the right way. I showed you this slide last year as a result because it was that illustration of we dropped $5.4 trillion, boom, right into the economy all at once. And that created a big wave. And then we were riding the ripples, right? You know how that looks? And this inflation was one of the big ripples. The interest rate's one of the big ripples. But the farther away we get from that moment, the smoother things become as we go. We're getting back to a more normal set of relationships. And that's where we're headed. It takes time. The world doesn't change on a dime. But let's talk about the big things that are driving this. The thing that was the initial spark, the invasion. When do we have peace? Because look, when we get peace in Ukraine, some of the things that are driving global food price inflation, some of the things that are driving energy price inflation, the sanctions and all the things will begin to level out. So peace in the Ukraine is important for more people than just the Ukrainians, right? But one of the things that has happened is inflation peaked. Inflation peaked. It peaked back in June. Core peaked in September. When I talked to you last August, it hadn't peaked yet. But now it's peaked. So what happens after a peak? It goes down, right? What does the Federal Reserve want it to do? Go down. The most important thing to pay attention to from now for the rest of the year is this term pause. Pause is the moment where the Federal Reserve stops raising interest rates. stops raising interest rates. Why is this important? Okay, payments in terms of trade. Manufacturers, no one knows what their total cost of capital is. Think of it if you think of your household. If you have a variable rate mortgage and you don't know how high interest rates are going to be 9 months from now, you don't know what the true cost of your budget in your house is, right? You don't know whether it's $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month or whatever it is. You don't know because you don't know how high interest rates are going to go. You don't know your cost of capital. You don't know your cost of goods. You don't know what your margin are. So are you going to be aggressive in spending? No. If you're a chief financial officer of a corporation, are you going to go out on a limb and make a prediction about your earnings or your budgets when you don't know what your total cost is? Of course not. You're human too. Your job depends on being able to meet those markers. So what are you going to do? Well, I don't know. It looks kind of ugly in the future because you don't know what your costs are. The moment they hit the pause button, people begin to know what the worst case scenario is. And American business is the most creative and professional in the world. Once people know their costs, they can predict their margins. Once they can predict their margins, they understand their pricing. So that affects corporate profit growth. Corporate profit growth affects the price of your stocks. So until we reach this moment, it's going to be a little foggy in the future. Now, the other thing to know about margins, just statistically, that might give you a little positiveness here, is that in the year after you've had an election that's a midterm election and we've changed control and have a split government, the S&P 500 is typically up about 16%. Okay, so that's positive. So think about it. The big things we need to know, don't know about peace, but we do know inflation, we've hit the peak. That's good. Directionally correct. Fed's getting what they want. We're close to a moment of pause. I'll show you that in a minute. Corporate profits will then be predictable. That's favorable, right? And we have the election positive stuff. So things are ahead of us begin to look a lot better than things behind us. Here's the line on inflation. Now, it's a lot easier to go from 9 to 5 than it is to go to 5 to 2. All right? But we have gone from 9 to 5. We're directionally correct. And if you look at core personal consumption expenditures, we're doing the same thing. Directionally correct. Now, the thing to know, though, is that inflation adjusts with long and variable lags. The Federal Reserve's trying to slow the economy down because it was too hot. So they raised interest rates. But the Fed meets over a 2-day period of time. They announce their announcement and the market adjusts in 5 minutes. American business and households cannot change that fast. Can you change your household budget in 5 minutes? No, you can't. My parent, by the way, talking about budgets real quick, my parents were married for 65 years. And my mother's heard me say this, so I'm not in trouble. For 65 years. And my mother was not the easiest person in the world. And she admitted it. And so I said, Dad, how do you possibly do this, right? Tell me the secret, because I want to be married to Layla for 65 years, which makes me really old. But the point of the matter is he said 2 things. Never interfere with the hair appointment or the makeup budget, right? So the important thing to do is you can't change the budget really fast. It takes households months. So the economy actually adjusts in long and variable lags. Of all of these interest rate moves that we've made, we've gone from roughly 0 to 5%. Right now, we've only seen the effect of about the first 3.25%. It takes a while to show up. So here we are. And we haven't seen a full effect of it. We're directionally correct. So what's next? Well, in about 4 days, we're going to find out. There's going to be a meeting, right? And the Federal Reserve is going to announce it. And then they've got a meeting in May, they got a meeting in June, they got a meeting in July. They could go from roughly 5 to 5.25, 5.50, 5.75. And then we hit this pause button. Here's the point that we know. They're waiting for a lot of what they've already done to show up. They've got a little bit more to do. But what we know is the Federal Reserve stops hiking interest rates. That's important. When they pause, when they stop, that's going to be a very positive moment. So look for the pause. What are they going to do next Wednesday? Most likely 25 basis points. And then they'll say something about, well, we're going to wait. Or they may not. And then we wait till June, right? So what's after that? But the bottom line to know is that the pause is positive. The pause is positive. We're really close to the end of the thing that has created all the turbulence in the market. It's an important thing to know. Much closer to the end than we are at the beginning. And if you look at corporate S&P 500 operating margins, they're still doing pretty good. As a matter of fact, of all the companies that have reported so far, 80% of them are beating earnings expectations. 80% are beating. Remember, people say, oh, we're going to have an earnings recession. Well, I don't think so. So the real questions are out there on your mind is inflation, how high, how long? Here's what we think. We think inflation will be over 4% at least all the way through 2023. At least all the way through 2023. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the University of Michigan survey, they're saying that inflation, most people believe that inflation is going to be right at about 3%, and it's going to be at 3% for a very long time, right? Short term is a little more volatile, but long term, if you're looking at 5 or 10 years, everybody's kind of settled in on 3%. Notice it's not the 2% that the Fed says they want. It's 3%, which is more reasonable. Why is that? Why do we think that through 2023, probably into 2024, we're going to be at 4%, eventually 3%? If you take a look at this, look at the purple part of this. The purple part of this is inflation broken down by sectors, and the purple part of this is still kind of rising a little bit. That is services and wages and shelter. Those things are sticky. They don't move as fast as commodities, energy, and fuel prices. So while we've got some statistical wind at our backs here, that kind of goes away at some point. So we think that realistically, you've got to plan on what do you think the real inflation is going to be? You basically plan on about 4%. Now let's talk about interest rates. This is what's called the yield curve. Now you hear that all the time, but what does it really mean? It means this. It means that this is a normalized yield curve. It's upward sloping. That means that interest paid for money that is immediate is lower than interest paid on money that's out there for a long time. You gotta charge more if you're going to tie it up for a long time. So think of it this way. Time deposits in your checking account. Do you earn much on your checking account? No. Do you earn more for a CD if you tie it up for a long period of time? Yes. That is a normal relationship. All right? And that's how things almost always work. And this is how banks always work. They basically take your time deposits and they loan them out longer. Right? Borrow short, loan long, make spread. That's how they make profits. But what happened is the Fed is trying to slow things down. What do? They pull, if you want to slow the economy down, you pull money out of it. You want to pull money out of the economy, you raise the interest rate. You raise the interest rate, you invert the yield curve. The Fed has nothing to do with a 30-year mortgage. They only mess with what's short term. Right? So that's why 30-year mortgages are actually, lower in price, or the the Treasury is actually paying a lower dividend than the 3 months. We have an inverted yield curve. And this is why you had a couple of banks with problems. I had a couple of people ask me about this. I'm going to take a second. Okay, Silicon Valley Bank, okay, and First Republic Bank, and a couple of were basically fairly poorly managed institutions. You know what they say, when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked? Most of those guys were partying too hard during week number 2 of basic banking. And what they did was they matched their obligations out on a very long end part of the curve where they should have had them short. Okay? So when the yield curve inverted, it made them unprofitable. Most banks do a better job of that. But this issue, a couple of banks having a few moments here, is probably one of the things that will cause the Fed to slow down. But the important thing for us, right, this is not 2008. This is not a systemic problem. This is not the bank system failing. That was a result of widespread fraud in the housing market. This is a couple of guys not managing their banks well. and we have an inverted yield curve. Here's the thing to know. Look at 415 and 375. That's a much less a steep line than it has been before. The point is inverted yield curves normalize. You know, we go like this, right? And, well, actually, this is the normal. And we went like this. Now we're kind of going like this. And pretty soon we'll be back to normal. That's important. The banking system will stabilize. The yield curves will normalize. Right? We're getting back to normal. The Fed's getting what they want. Let's talk about interest rates then. Since the tool that the Fed is using are interest rates, how high are they going to be for how long? We think that short-term interest rates are going to be over 4% to sometime in 2024. They're going to pause it, and they're going to hold it for a long time, and then they're going to pivot. So pause means stop and hold. Pivot means lower it. Okay? So pause is when things start looking better. Pivot is when they lower interest rates. What happens when they lower interest rates? What happens to the stock market typically? Goes up, right? Goes up. Now here's the thing to know. For almost most of us in this room, we go, oh my God, 4%. Or, oh my God, 3% inflation. We haven't had that in 15 years. You have had more than 3% inflation for over half your life. You just forgot it because we were dealing in this weird space parallel universe of 0, 0, 0 for 15 years. All right? Not only that, you spent almost more than half our lives with interest rates over 4%. Does anybody remember getting a 6% loan on your house and thinking you scored big time? You bet. And during this period of time, gross domestic products increased 6% over that period of time on average, and we've had a stock market, the S&P 500 on average, has gone up 7.5%. Here's the bottom line, folks. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We're getting back to an environment that we survived, thrived, and did quite well for decades. It's just the transition that's been a little tough. So where we go forward is we look, is there going to be a pause? That's the thing to look for. We're probably somewhere between 4 and 90 days to the pause. Between 4 and 90 days. All right? The pivot will probably be sometime in 2024. The big question about no recession, little recession, big recession, we're in the camp that said we'll probably have a little bit of a recession in the back half of this year. It'll be kind of sector by sector and probably over before you know it. We don't see a big recession. We don't see a big recession. I'll tell you why. It's really simple. We have more people working today than we ever have had. We've got 3 million more people working today than we did at the height before the pandemic, at a median wage of over $55,000 per person. That's a lot of money, particularly outside of California. Not only that, real wages and salaries are at an all-time high. More people making more money than ever before. We have 1.6 jobs for everybody that's looking. 1.6 jobs for everybody that's looking. It's really hard to have a bad recession with low unemployment and reasonable balance sheets. Why do we have reasonable balance sheets? Because everybody saved a lot of money during COVID. You've got about $1 trillion worth of excess savings. Hard to have a bad recession during that period of time. So that's what we know. That's what's going ahead of us. So now what do? Well, it's probably important for you guys to know how we think. This is the part people write in and go, I want to know more about how Dryden thinks. My 20-year-old daughter doesn't really care what I think, but no, she's a great kid. She's here, so she'll probably throw a rock at me later. But the important thing is, how do we think? During this environment of transition, during this moment where the economy is going through transitioning from rapid increase of interest rates into a more stable, paused environment, all these you hold on to the principles. These are the same reasons why we ended up being number 7, right? You focus on the fact that human behavior drives consumption. You focus on the process of looking for big knowable themes, identify the choke points. You've heard me say this before, right? A choke point is at that point in place in time, everything's got to go through it to get to where it is, from where it is to where it wants to be. It's like a bridge across a river. The guy that controls the bridge can charge you a toll, or you don't get satisfied. It's like having a little monopoly. So what we do, really simple. Human behavior drives consumption. Every dollar is a vote. Nobody makes a penny until someone decides to buy. If we can get into the mind of the consumer and be predictive about what someone's going to buy, we can be predictive about what they're going to buy, how they're going to buy it, and who they're going to buy it from. And then we do choke point analysis and figure out who makes the most margin, right? Who's got the monopoly in the supply chain? Who do you got to pay no matter what? That's who you want to own. You see, I don't care what's in each of these trucks. I don't. I want to be the toll road. I'm going to make my money off of every one of them coming through. I don't care who wins Cola Wars, Coke or Pepsi. I am completely ambivalent because I want to be the lining inside the can that both of them have to buy so the drink does not taste like aluminum. Big knowable theme, right? Understand the choke points, target the best of class. So let's talk about what's going to happen now. Well, we've got, for the last 15 years, the big knowable theme in the markets has been TINA. There is no alternative to equities, right? Because you had no interest rates. Well, now, I call it BABY. You know what that stands for? Bonds are back, y'all. You actually have an interest rate. 2-year Treasury yields above 4%. Now, before, you really even weren't even, if you had money in treasuries, you had money in the cash, you weren't even keeping up with inflation. Now the 2-year Treasury yields above 4%. And we're in this environment where this is kind of how it works, right? If interest rates go down, bond prices go up. Interest rates go up, bond prices go down. That's why last year in 2022, you had both the stock market and the bond market go down. If you had bonds, you were down 16%. Highly unusual for that to happen. But those are the facts. Now, what did we say is going to happen in 2024? What's going to happen to interest rates? Go down. What's going to happen to bond prices? All right, they'll go up. As a matter of fact, let's take a look at this a little bit when you talk about it, because now you guys are beginning to see bonds in your accounts, right? And so we want to kind of bring this up. So here's bond A and bond B, right? We'll talk about the Treasury. They matured $100, right? So look at, and everybody looks at the coupon for the yield, right? And the maturity is 2 years. So a lot of people would look at this and go, well, I like the one that pays 6%. But they have actually the exact same yield, 4% annually. So it makes a big difference in terms of what bonds you have in your portfolio. That's why we have to look at them. That's why we make some careful decisions every day on the desk. So let's talk about the future of equities. The key thing about equities in this environment is to invest in the things that happen no matter what. I don't have a perfect crystal ball. I can't tell you exactly when peace is going to break out in Ukraine. I have a pretty good idea. I can't tell you exactly what the Fed's going to do, although we have a range of time period. I can't tell you exactly what the next budget is going to look like when they roll it out of Congress. But we can know that there are certain things that we as consumers do that don't really change. What we do doesn't change that much. How we do it changes. But what we do doesn't change that much. There's two fundamental drivers of economic activity, policy and people. Policy, that's what's done by the Federal Reserve, Mr. Powell and his friends. That's monetary policy. And then fiscal policy, which is done by Congress. They're either putting money in the economy or they're taking money out. It's really all they do, one way or the other. And then you have people. We're consumers. We demand things and we spend our money on it. Human behavior drives consumption. Every dollar's a vote. I want to spend $1 on this more than I want to spend it on something else. So let's talk about the things that are happening no matter what, because those are good investment themes for us in this environment. I am not a fan of war. I've been to war 6 times. But it is said that there will always be wars and rumors of wars. And we are continuing to have a conventional war in Ukraine. Now, we're involved in that war because we're supporting the Ukrainians, and you can remember me thanking you for that last year. And some of you probably even remember this slide, because in that Ukrainian soldier's hand is a Javelin missile. You paid $175,000 for that. But if you see the carnage right next to that, that's what's left of a Russian T-72 tank. They paid $3.2 million for that. I like the math. I like the math. As a matter of fact, I like this stuff. Watch this video. This is a Javelin missile. And that dust cloud's a Russian tank. Boom! And that's how it works. I kind of like it. I'm sorry. I brought a souvenir from the Gulf War with me today. This is a tanker's helmet. Anybody here drive a tank? Anybody here blow up a tank? It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. And last year I talked about how the American taxpayer had given the Ukrainians the HIMARS rocket, which helped them stave off the Russians and help stop the liquidation of their country, which they did. They stopped the Russian advance. Now we and NATO have given the Ukrainians about 340 main battle tanks, the M1 Abrams, the Challenger 2, and the Leopard 2, and they now have a full division's worth, and they're training up those people. And these tanks have optical sights that allow you to fight at night, and the Russian tanks do not. Now, if you can fight and see the enemy and they can't see you, who wins? There you go. Now, I'm not part of the Ukrainian General Staff, and I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but sometime between now and late summer, the Ukrainians have both the equipment, the motivation, and the weather that will allow them to launch a counteroffensive. And when they do that and they have that counteroffensive, they're going to be able to change circumstances on the ground. And when they're able to do that, that's when they'll be able to be in a position that we can have peace. So when you ask about when, I can't tell you when we're going to have peace in Ukraine, but I can tell you that sometime between now and the end of this year, things are going to be a lot different than they are right now. The Russians failed in their winter offensive. So things on the ground are going to change. Now, how does this really affect the rest of us from an investable theory? The rest of NATO finally figured out it's time to pay our dues. You had a lot of countries that were not paying their full 2% of their GDP into NATO to build up their defenses. Now, they've just watched one of their neighbors, right, be attacked by Russia and have a conventional war. Does the rest of Europe want that? No. Do our NATO allies want that? No. So they decided, you know what, after all these years of him hawing around, we probably will pay our bills, and Finland joins. And Sweden does too. What does that mean in pure math? That increases the budget by $80 billion. Now, $80 billion is $20 billion more than the entire Russian budget. They spend about $60 billion. Now, NATO is going to add $80 billion. $80 billion is $20 billion more than the entire UK budget, and they are our strongest ally. So as we're like adding a whole nother UK. And the other thing that happens, our friends in the East have said, you know what, we're a little worried about this stuff too, these people that misbehave, so we're going to increase our budget. So our partners, our military partners over there, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, have all increased their military budgets another $13 billion. So now we have $93 billion in additional money annually running at the defense. And due to interoperability agreements, which means if we're the big dog, your equipment's got to work with us, right? Because we're who you're going to call. Guess who they have to spend that money with? The U.S. companies, our big four, Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman, are going to be the benefactors, along with these other guys, of this massive increase in defense spending with NATO and our Asian partners. Well, if someone's going to get a whole lot more money spent, I think those are companies we ought to own. And you do. It's in most of your accounts already. Make sense? We all hate war. We might as well make some money off of it. Let's talk about infrastructure. Another big thing. I've talked about this before, but have you ever been driving across a bridge and there's a big 18-wheeler next to you? And everything's shaking and it gets a little uncomfortable, right? That's because there's 171 million crossings every day on 45,000 structurally deficient bridges. Most of the bridges in this country are over 50 years old. I figured that out after I turned 50. Things don't work as well. It's just you wear out, right? You're not quite as strong as you used to be. And if you lined up all the structurally deficient bridges, it would stretch from Las Vegas to Seattle, over 1,100 miles. But it's a lot of money. You have to have political will. How would you like to be the congressman in this district that did not vote for the highway bill? 13 people died, 143 were injured. So even though Congress can rarely agree on anything, they did agree bipartisanly to spend $500 billion on roads and bridges in the infrastructure plan. This authorization has been signed and agreed to. $500 billion is a lot of money. And guess what? There's only 33 companies that are publicly traded that are really eligible to do the work because it's government contracts. You have to have $1 billion in capital, $1 billion in sales to be able to do it. So we have 33 companies that have $500 billion running right after them. The math works out like this. Before this, their normal revenues were about $200 billion a year. Now they're getting about 220. So you take a group of companies, you increase their revenues by 10% every year. That's probably going to be a good thing for those stocks. We invest in them no matter what. I talk about this all the time. Human behavior drives consumption. All of us are decision makers. I won't spend a lot of time on this because many of you have seen this. However, I want to remind you that 70% of U.S. GDP is consumption. Question. If I can tell you what 100 million people are going to do before they do it, do you think we can make some money? Of course. And that's why you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've seen me do this a bunch of times. We're not that different. Human beings haven't changed over the last several hundred years. We still fulfill our physiological needs, safety and security, love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization. In that order, we don't vary. And you can take a look at how we spend our money and pick the companies that we spend it with. And we see an economy that continues to grow, earnings that continues to grow, things that don't particularly change. And our consumption patterns don't change that much. So in an environment where you're really not sure what's going on and you're trying to focus on the no matter what, bet on the American consumer. That's the way to look at it. That's the what we do. We can also focus on the how. You've seen me talk about this before, but it has not changed. Who in this room has not bought something on Amazon? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I got 5 out of 350 of you. I think I made my point. E-commerce is the fastest growing way that Americans engage in the national pastime, which is shopping. We shop more than we do anything else. And the way we shop is increasingly online. So much, though, that you probably can't buy something online without using one or more of these companies. They're so dominant that the 23 companies I listed there the sales are the equivalent of 11.5% of total U.S. GDP. 11.5% of everything that goes on in the U.S. economy in 23 companies. If you added it up, it'd be the 7th largest economy in the world, bigger than France. Pretty cool. And interestingly enough, big noble theme, identify the choke points. 58% of all the gross merchandise value is controlled by 4 companies. 58 cents out of every dollar. These are in most of your portfolios. See, here's the thing to recognize. The what we do doesn't change so much. The how we do is that trend. And that's that trend we want to get in front of, because that's a good investable thing. Now let's talk about the rest of the future. I'm covering from here and now what's going on between now and the end of the year, or now and through 2024. But let's talk about the things that are really important, because inflation is still with us. We talked about that. Inflation is going to be sticky at this 4 level. What's the cure for inflation? Increase in labor productivity. As we added more technology, that's the blue line. As we added more technology going forward over time, we increase the labor productivity of every person in the labor force. And by doing that, it helped push down cost. So for the longest period of time when we had very little inflation, and a lot of it was due to the fact of the increase of labor productivity. Then all of a sudden, boom, we have this spike in inflation. And that's increased. What are we going to do to get the next generation of the big, because you take a look at this, 1982, when that starts taking off, is about when you got the 386 computer embedded into cash registers at Walmart. And that's when everybody started using technology. And look how it took off. We kept inflation down. What's going to now help us combat the next piece of inflation? Artificial intelligence. As a matter of fact, in the last latest earnings calls, but the average artificial intelligence for most companies was mentioned like 45 times in every earnings call that everybody had. AI is the next big thing. It's going to help change our lives, because remember, I said we have 1.6 jobs open for every worker. We don't have enough workers, folks. We don't. Particularly in a world you're worried about what's going on globally and you want to move jobs back to the U.S. We don't have enough workers. So the only way we're going to fix that is to use technology. Watch this.
Outfitted with cameras and sensors, this autonomous robot is verifying price signs and looking for out-of-stock items.
These cameras on the side are capturing images of the shelves that are then uploaded to our cloud environment to determine what products are out of stock, what's mispriced, what's in the wrong position.
Inventory is one of the biggest challenges retailers face. Missed sales from empty shelves and out-of-stock items cost U.S. retailers $82 billion in 2021, or about $1.6 billion a week.
So this would tell us that the Snickers is low, and we probably need to get more Snickers dropped from our back stock and brought out to the floor.
An out-of-stock item is when a shopper leaves a store without purchasing what they intended to buy. The product could be in a warehouse, in a different aisle, or on the shelf, but blocked by a sign or display. To help manage their inventories, a growing number of retailers, like Sam's Club and BJ's Wholesale, are turning to robotics and automation to beef up their operations. Inspecting store aisles has historically been the job of retail workers who check inventory, verify price tag compliance, and maintain the ideal state of the store. When done by a human, the job is laborious, costly, and not always entirely accurate. Based in San Diego, California, Brain Corp got its start in 2009 as a research project for Qualcomm. Before moving into inventory scanning, it first developed self-driving technology for floor cleaners. In 2022, Walmart-owned Sam's Club expanded its relationship with Brain Corp, adding inventory robots to its 600 stores. The dual-purpose machines manufactured by Tenet use technology by Brain Corp to move autonomously through the store, cleaning floors and acquiring data along the way. Robots like this one have as many as 5 cameras used to scan store shelves, as well as 3D cameras to assist with navigation.
The key thing to know is that the use of artificial intelligence increases labor productivity, and increased labor productivity helps cure inflation. They were able to cut back the number of employees and salaried people that they have in those stores, have better accuracy, and therefore control their price and structure and profits better, just by using technology to do things. And the point of the matter is the people that have been displaced, they have plenty of opportunities for other jobs. And there's plenty of jobs for them. So we're beginning to see artificial intelligence help us keep control on inflation. So let me sum this up. For the markets, we see the first half of the year kind of continuing to be volatile and a grind. The second half, we see it more stable, even though we may have a small recession, because it's all about the pause. The pause is positive. In 2024, we're generally positive because of the likelihood of cuts in interest rates. So it's important for your equity portfolios to be focused on where things are going in the future. The stock market is a discounting mechanism activity about 9 to 12 months out. You can't wait until you get there because the market's then too far ahead of you. So you have to be a little bit ahead of the game. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to take cash balances and keep those in a little bit fixed income, but not real long, right? Somewhere between 1 and 2 years. We think aerospace and defense is a good place to be because you're seeing a massive continued trend of increase in defense spending globally as a result of the Ukraine war. And all the stuff they're using over there, we got to rebuild the inventories, right? We think that infrastructure that already has, there's very few things in life that are more sure than death, taxes, and a signed appropriations bill. They don't usually cut those things back, right? So the point is we think infrastructure is a good place for roads and bridges. We have to have them, and Congress is paying for them. We think that artificial intelligence and big tech are sectors to certainly invest in because that's going to be how we move to the next generation of fighting this inflation business. And we think payments are important. Companies that have to do with payments. If we're going to have some inflation, if you think about a credit card payment company, the higher the ticket charge, the more money they make. We may not like inflation, but we might as well find the thing that takes advantage of it. So payments. So to summarize all of this, ladies and gentlemen, prepare for spring. Storm's over. Things are getting better. Think long term. Bonds are back. There is an alternative for cash, and we can deploy cash at higher rates. The pause, somewhere between 4 and 90 days, folks, is positive for the economy and for the markets. Core inflation is going to stay over 4% through 2023. But the yield curve is going to begin to normalize. We see little or no recession in the back half of the year and a pivot, interest rates going down, in 2024. Equities are going to be how you keep up with inflation. You can't keep up with inflation purely in fixed income. Equities are how you keep up inflation, and technology is how you overcome it. And in these environments, as we go through these transitions, as we move after the storm, the best thing to do is invest in the things that occur no matter what. And also, have a little fun with it. Watch this.
A robot?
Yes.
What are we going to do with a robot?
Well, Astro, follow me.
Hi, Grandma. I miss you.
I miss you too. Hey, you got the toy I sent.
Yeah, I love it. Astro, follow me.
Cool. All right, race ya.
Come on.
Told you I turned it off.
And now I totally believe you. Ooh, yikes.
Message from Steve. Remember to eat something green today, Dad.
Check.
Hey, Barbie. Just return the dogs.
Astro, let's dance.
Thought we weren't home, huh? You thought wrong. It's a good try, though.
What? Thank you. All right, I'm in.
And by the way, Astro is made by Amazon, one of the companies that many of you own in your portfolios. The point of the matter is that technology continues to be the way we have better lives, better economies, we combat inflation, and we move forward. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to tell you, spring is here. It is after the storm. I appreciate all the attention. I hope that this has been informative. I hope you enjoyed it, and I sincerely thank you for coming. Please make sure that you fill out your questionnaires and your surveys, because we need that information from you to help you better and to help us make sure that every year we make this a better event. For those of you who are joining us via Zoom, you have a QR code that you can use for your survey. Send that in. Now, the people here locally and live, you turn in this thing for the raffle, for the Amazon gift card. For the Zoomers, fill that out. We'll leave it up for a few minutes, and you can make sure that you have, have that filled in, and you get entered for an Amazon gift card. Next year's client luncheon, Saturday, April the 24th, 2024. And we really sincerely appreciate you. That's what I said, the 27th of 2024. All right, 27th, 2024. And that's going to be at the Hilton in Long Beach. Thank you very much. Layla and I appreciate it. I hope it's been informative.